as the sun began to set behind the towering trees. My friends and I arrived at the campsite deep in the heart of the forest. Excitement filled the air as we set up our tents and started a fire for the night. It was supposed to be a fun and a relaxing weekend in nature. But little did we know, it would turn into the scariest experience of our lives. As darkness fell, we gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. A chill crept up my spine as I listened to the eeriness of the forest at night. The rustling of leaves and the hooting of owls echoed through the trees, but I shrugged it off, trying to convince myself that it was all just my imagination. As the night went on, the noises became louder and more frequent, causing uneasiness to settle in my gut. My friends eventually retired to their tents, leaving me alone by the dying fire. I sat there for a while, gazing into the darkness, the flickering flames being the only source of light. Suddenly, I heard a loud snap from the surrounding bushes, followed by the heavy footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest as I clutched my flashlight and shining it towards the direction of the noise. At first, I saw nothing but the swaying treetops. But then, I caught a glimpse of something, or someone, darting behind a nearby tree. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself that it was just an animal. But as a cold breeze swept through the campsite, I couldn't shake off the feeling that we were being watched. I quickly retreated to my tent, zipping it tightly. The darkness inside enclosed me, making it hard for me to fall asleep. Every little noise made me jump, and I couldn't stop the anxious thoughts from flooding from my mind. As I lay there, shivering and wide awake, I couldn't help but wonder if this was a good idea after all. The next morning, my friends and I gathered around the campfire, trying to brush off the events of the previous night as nothing more than an overreactive imagination. We planned to go on a short hike and explore the surrounding area, hoping it would take off our minds of things. As we ventured deeper into the thick forest, we stumbled upon an old cabin. It was old and dilapidated, with broken windows and a creaky front door. My heart started racing at the sight of it, and I felt the chill run down my spine. My friends, however, were excited and pushed open the door, eager to explore. Stepping inside, the musty smell and rotting wood made me feel uneasy. But I tried to hide my fear, not wanting to ruin the fun for my friends. As we searched the cabin, we found some old pictures on the walls, a dusty piano in the corner, and a journal on a table. The journal seemed to be the diary of the previous owner, and as my friends started reading out loud, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread building up inside me. The diary entry spoke of a man who had been living in the forest for years, claiming the trees and animals as his own. But his mental state seemed unstable. He talked about monsters and evil spirits that were after him, and how he was the only one who could protect the forest from them. The more we read, the more frightened and unsettled we became. We quickly leave the cabin, our nerves on edge. As we made our way back to the campsite, a strange noise caught our attention. It sounded like someone was crying. We cautiously followed the sound, which led us to a clearing. In the middle of the clearing stood a tall figure, its back turned towards us. Its long, twisted limbs seemed to blend with the trees, making it hard to distinguish where it ended and the forest began. Its crying sounds seemed to be coming from the figure, but as we approached, the crying turned into a menacing laugh. Fear swept through me as my friends and I stood frozen in place, unsure what to do. As the figure turned towards us, I let out a blood-curdling scream. Its face was deformed and contorted, with piercing red eyes that seemed to stare right through us. Without a second thought, we turned and ran back to the campsite, not even daring to look back. As we reached the safety of our tents, we can still hear the creature's eerie laughter echoing through the forest. We spent the rest of the day huddled inside, too afraid to leave. Our phones had no signal. We were completely cut off from the outside world. That night, as our fire burned low and our nerves were on the edge, we heard heavy footsteps circling our campsite. We were too terrified to even peek outside, knowing that the creature was lurking in the darkness. It felt like hours before the noises finally stopped, and we were able to get some sleep. The next morning, we quickly packed up our things, desperate to leave the forest behind and never look back. As we made our way back to civilization, we couldn't help but reflect on the terrifying events of our camping trip. We may never know for sure what we encountered in that terrifying forest, but one thing was certain. We were lucky to make it out alive. And one thing was for sure. I would never go camping in the forest again. The night air hung heavy with an enormous stillness, as I, a weary McDonald's employee, reluctantly stepped into the dimly lit fast food restaurant for my night shift. The golden arches outside cast long shadows, creating an eerie atmosphere that clung to the empty parking lot. As the clock struck midnight, I knew I was in for a long, solitary night. My usual routine consisted of mundane tasks, flipping burgers, taking orders, and serving the occasional late-night customer. However, this particular night felt different. Behind the counter, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The kitchen equipment hummed softly, and the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Determined to ignore my growing unease, I focused on wiping down the counters and restocking supplies. The drive-thru intercom crackled to life, making me jump. "Welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" I recited, my voice trembling slightly. There was only silence on the other end. I frowned, thinking it might be a glitch in the system. Just as I was about to speak again, a soft whisper echoed through the speaker, barely audible. "Help me." A chill ran down my spine, and I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. I looked around, half expecting to see a prankster or a colleague playing tricks on me. The restaurant, however, remained empty. Uneasy, I dismissed it as my imagination and continued with my duties. Throughout the night, the whispers persisted. I heard faint voices mumbling in the distance, their words unintelligible. As I moved from the kitchen to the dining area, the temperature seemed to drop. and an invisible presence tugged at my clothing. I quickened my pace, glancing nervously over my shoulder. The ghostly encounters escalated when I entered the walk-in freezer to retrieve more supplies. The temperature plummeted, and my breath hung in the air like a visible specter. As I reached for a box on the high shelf, the heavy door slammed shut behind me with a resounding thud. Panic set in as I frantically pounded on the door, my breath forming mist in the icy air. The whispers grew louder, now echoing within the confined space. "Release us," they pleaded, sending their shivers down my spine. With a surge of adrenaline, I forced the freezer door open and stumbled out, gasping for breath. I hesitated, but pressed on with my duties, feeling a heavy weight on my shoulders. The once familiar hum of the kitchen equipment now sounded like a haunted melody. As the night wore on, my fear intensified. The voices became more insistent, the messages more desperate. I couldn't escape the feeling that the spirits were trying to communicate something important, something unresolved from the past. But what could I do? In the early hours of the morning, as the first days of dawn illuminated the empty restaurant, the whispers finally ceased. Exhausted and terrified, I slumped into a booth questioning my sanity. Was it all a figment of my imagination? A result of sleep deprivation? Or had I truly encountered restless spirits trapped in the confines of the McDonald's? With a trembling hand, I reached for my phone, intending to call for help or share my harrowing experience with someone. As I scrolled through my contacts, I noticed an old newspaper article about the McDonald's location. The headline sent a chill down my spine. Tragic incident claims lives at local fast food restaurant. The article detailed a fire that had engulfed the restaurant years ago, leading to the loss of several lives. The spirits I encountered were the echoes of the past, yearning for release. As the realization dawned on me, I couldn't help but wonder if I had played a part in helping those lost souls find peace. From that night forward, the McDonald's held an unspoken understanding with the supernatural. I continued my night shifts, now accompanied by a newfound awareness of the spirits that lingered. The whispers have stopped, but the lingering presence served as a haunting reminder of the otherworldly events that had unfolded in the dead of night. The once ordinary fast food joint had become a nexus between the living and the departed, forever bound by the shared experience of that fateful night. As time went on, I delved deeper into the history of the McDonald's location. I discovered that the fire had been particularly gruesome, claiming not only the lives of employees, but also customers who had been enjoying their meals. The souls of the departed, it seemed, found no peace. The restless spirits tethered to the place they once frequented. One night, as I was closing up, I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The air grew charged, and a faint glow emanated from the corners of the restaurant. The spirits had returned, but this time they didn't convey fear and desperation. Instead, I felt a sense of gratitude. A spectral figure materialized before me, a silhouette in the shape of a woman. The figure's eyes held a mix of sorrow and relief, and a soft, ethereal voice filled the air. "Thank you for hearing us. Thank you for helping us find peace." The apparition reached out a transparent hand, and I, despite of my initial fear, extended mine. A gentle warmth enveloped me, and a flood of emotions washed over me. as it was if the spirits were expecting their gratitude through a shared connection. From that moment on, the supernatural occurrences at McDonald's became less frequent. The once restless spirits seemed to have found solace, the presence now more of a confronting one than a haunting one. I continued my shifts, not as an employee haunted by the paranormal, but as a guardian of sorts, watching over the departed souls that had finally found rest. I had been on the road for hours, the long stretch of highway seeming to never end. I had been a trucker for years, driving alone through the endless expanse of open roads. But tonight, something felt off. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a sense of unease had been creeping up on me since I started my journey. The silence of night was only broken by the rumbling of my truck's engine and the occasional howling of the wind. The darkness seemed to shallow everything in its path, making the road seemed never-ending. Just as I was about to shrug off my uneasiness and continue on, my truck suddenly started to sputter and slow down. I cursed, pulling over to the side of the road. I got out and checked the engine, but everything seemed to be in working order. With a frustrated sigh, I climbed back into the driver's seat and turned the key, hoping that the problem had fixed itself. But as soon as I started the engine, I noticed a figure standing in the distance, just at the edge of the darkness. My heart started to race as I squinted, trying to make out of what or who it could be. I had driven on these roads countless times, and I had never seen anyone out here in the dead of night. Fear started to take the hold of me as a chill ran down my spine. I quickly turned off the engine and sat in silence, my eyes never leaving the figure in the distance. But to my horror, the figure started to move towards me. Without hesitation, I jumped out of the truck and ran towards the back, grabbing a tire iron for protection. The figure was getting closer and my heart was pounding in my chest. I could see now that it was a person, their features hidden in the shadows. "Who are you and what do you want?" I yelled, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure stopped in the tracks, only a few feet away from me. They remained silent, almost as if they were studying me. The air around us was thick with tension and fear. I could feel my heart racing as I stood there, the tire iron shaking in my grip. After what it felt like an eternity, the figure finally spoke. "You shouldn't have stopped." The voice was deep and raspy, sending shivers down my spine. I was about to ask them what they meant when suddenly the unknown person lunged at me. I swung the tire iron in self-defense and managed to hit him in the arm. They stumbled back and quickly recovered, throwing themselves at me once again. We grappled in the darkness, my adrenaline pumping as I tried to fight off the stranger who seemed to have been attacking me for no reason. But just as I was about to get the upper hand, I felt a sharp pain under my side and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a dark room, my hands and feet bound with rope. A panic set as I was looking around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The room was dimly lit, with a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Just as I was about to try to break free from my restraints, the door creaked open, revealing the figure from the highway. But now, they were clad in a long cloak, their face hidden in the shadows. "Do you know why you're here?" Their voice echoed through the room. I shook my head, my heart racing. "You stopped on the wrong stretch of the highway at the wrong time. You see, this is my territory, and I don't take kindly to trespassers." The figure spoke with an unnerving calmness. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This person, this stranger had attacked me and kidnapped me for simply stopping on the side of the road. As if sensing my thoughts, they continued. You see, I've been waiting for someone like you. Someone who's foolish enough to stop and enter my domain. I struggled against my restraints, but they were tight and showed no signs of giving. The figure watched with amusement, almost if they were enjoying my torment. I feed on fear, you see, and you're going to be my next meal, they revealed with a sinister smile. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of this nightmare. How had I ended up in this situation? How was I going to get out of it? But as the figure came closer, ready to feed on my terror, I remembered something my late grandmother had told me when I was a child. She had always warned me to never trust strangers, but especially those who seemed to thrive on causing harm and fear. With all the strength I could muster, I let out a battle cry and lunged at the figure. Surprised by my sudden attack, they stumbled back, and I used the opportunity to break free from my restraints and run towards the door. I didn't look back as I ran through the darkness, my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, I saw the exit and burst out into the night air, grasping for air. I did not stop running until I was back in my truck, and even then, I drove as fast as I could away from the stretch of the highway. Years later, I still think about the night and wonder who or what the figure was, and if they were still out there, waiting for their next victim. I never stop on the side of the road now, always reminding myself of the horrors that could be lurking in the darkness. Because sometimes, the scariest things are not the things we can see, but the things that hide in the shadows. I always thought my neighbor, Mr. Blackwood, was a strange man. Growing up, I would often see him sitting alone on his front porch, staring blankly into space with a creepy smile on his face. I would also notice the occasional person walking into his house, but they never seemed to come out. I brushed it off as just my overreactive imagination, until one night when I heard the screams. It was a cold and stormy night, and I was at home alone. I was sitting in my living room, engrossed in this scary movie, when suddenly I heard a blood-curdling scream pierce through the quiet neighborhood. At first, I thought it was just a scene from the movie, but the scream continued, getting louder and more intense. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks in my mind. But then, the scream turned into a cry for help, and I knew it was real. I quickly turned off the TV and opened my window, trying to locate the source of the screams. It was coming from Mr. Blackwood's house. Without thinking twice, I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside towards his house. As I approached his front door, I could feel my heart racing with fear and adrenaline. However, when I pressed my ear against the door, the screams suddenly stopped. It was all dead quiet. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to knock on the door or just go back home. But before I could make a decision, the front door slowly creaked open. I shone my flashlight into the dark hallway, but there was no one there. I cautiously stepped inside, the musty smell hitting my nostrils. The house was eerily quiet, and I could feel an unsettling presence looming over me. I followed the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs, as if someone was rushing towards the bedroom. With each step, the floorboards creaked under my weight, making me feel like I was being watched. I reached the bedroom and slowly pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw inside will forever haunt me. Mr. Blackwood was standing in front of the window, clutching a knife in his hand. But it wasn't the knife
that made my blood run cold. It was the person laying on the bed, bound and gagged, with a look of pure terror in their eyes. It was my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Carmichael. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had always thought Mr. Blackwood was a harmless but creepy man. I would have imagined him capable of such heinous acts. But before I could process everything, he turned around and faced me with that same creepy smile I had seen on his face countless times before. "Hello, my dear neighbor," he said in a chillingly calm voice. "I've been expecting you." My mind was racing, trying to come up with an escape plan. But before I could move, he lunged towards me with a knife. I let out a scream and ran out of the room as fast as I could. I could hear his heavy footsteps chasing me after as I sprinted down the stairs, almost tripping in the process. I could feel his presence looming close behind me, his crazed laughter echoing through the house. I finally reached the front door and flung it open, running out into the storming night. I could hear him shouting and cursing behind me, but I didn't dare to turn around. I ran all the way to my house, my heart pounding in my ears. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to catch my breath and make sense of everything that had just happened. I couldn't believe my neighbor was a deranged murderer. I should have trusted my instincts all those years ago. But the horror wouldn't end there. For the rest of the night, I could hear strange noises coming from Mr. Blackwood's house. I could hear footsteps pacing around, doors slamming shut, and even more screams. And then, it all finally stopped. The next morning, I called the police and told them everything that had happened. They searched Mr. Blackwood's house, and what they found was beyond terrifying. The basement was filled with torture devices and the bodies of his victims. It turned out he had been luring people into his house for years, never letting them leave. Mr. Carmichael was the lucky one. She had somehow managed to escape and run to my neighbor's house for help. Others were not so fortunate. I was lucky to have survived that night, and to have finally exposed Mr. Blackwood for the monster he truly was. But even though he was behind bars, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still not right. I would often catch glimpses of Mr. Blackwood staring at me through the prison bars, that same creepy smile never leaving his face. I couldn't help but wonder if it was still somehow haunting me from beyond the grave. But the worst of it all was the nightmares. Every night, I would dream of being trapped inside Mr. Blackwood's house, hearing the screams of his victims echoing through the walls. I would see his face, twisted into that same twisted smile as he chased me after with a knife. I became paranoid, constantly checking my locks and looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike again. It wasn't until I moved away from that neighborhood and started therapy that the nightmares had finally stopped. To this day, I still shudder at the memory of that stormy night and the horrors that took place in my neighbor's house. It goes to show, you may never truly know what's hidden behind closed doors, and the people you think you know may be hiding dark secrets. Trust your instincts, because you never know. The creepy neighbor next door may be far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. I'd opened the app just to see what kind of nonsense it would spit out next. One time, I swear it added a random stranger to my contacts list and then started sending them selfies.
another time and sent a picture of my bedroom to my ex-girlfriend, even though I unadded her months ago. It was always just a little creepy, but yet I couldn't bring myself to delete it. That night, I was laying in bed, phone in my hand, browsing through the random stories that my friends had shared. I was starting to feel tired, so I shut my eyes for a moment, but before I knew it, I was sucked into the app again. I opened my camera, thinking maybe I should just take a picture of myself and send it to one of my actual friends, just to feel a little less alone. But as I held my phone to my face, something felt off. The screen flickered, and for a split second, I swore I saw a figure in the mirror behind me. I shivered, quickly snapping to the photo and sending it to myself. As I waited for the app to load, I tried to shake it off the eerie feeling that had settled me over. But then, as the photo finally appeared on my screen, I gasped. In the picture, I wasn't alone. Standing behind me, in the exact spot where I had seen the figure in the mirror, was a girl. Or, at least that's what she looked like at first. As I stared at the photo, her features began to shift and warp, her once beautiful face twisting into something nightmarish. Her mouth stretched into a wide, hungry grin, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural shade of green. I feel like a cold sweat break out of my back as I realized that this was no ordinary glitch. This was something else entirely, something unknowable. Panic rising in my throat, I tried to tap on the photo to close it, but my fingers seemed to freeze in place. The more I struggled, the more the image on the screen began to change, as if it were alive. The girl in the photo leaned forward, her face inches from my own, and whispered something in a language I'd never heard before. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt the weight settled heavily on my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I was trapped, helpless, as the girl in the photo continued to taunt me, her voice echoing through my head like a nightmare symphony. Time seemed to slow down, and I could feel myself fading away, slipping into nothingness. As the last threads of consciousness unraveled, I caught a glimpse of something else in the corner of my eye. Another figure, standing just beyond the edge of my own field of vision. It was indistinct, shapeless, but somehow familiar. Like it had been there all along, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The figure began to solidify, becoming more distinct with each passing second. It was a man, tall and thin, with skin as pale as the moonlight streaming through my window. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull, and his mouth was twisted into a bitter smile. He looked like the Wraith, a creature from my nightmares come to life. As he stepped closer, I felt a wave of cold wash over me, as if the air had been sucked from the room. He reached out a skeletal hand and touched my cheek, and for a moment I felt weightless, as if I was floating. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt myself growing weaker. "You're mine now," he whispered, his voice like a rustling of ancient leaves. "You belong to us, and you shall never be free." As these words washed over me, I felt a strange calm descend upon me. I welcomed the darkness, embraced like an old friend. The girl in the photo retreated, fading back into the shadows from which she had emerged. The room spun, and I felt myself drifting further and further away. My last thought was of the man, standing there before me, with his icy fingers still pressed against my skin. He looked like the figure from my nightmares, but somehow In this moment, he felt like home. He was the only constant in the strange, shifting world. As I slipped into oblivion, I knew I would never be free from his grasp. My vision faded to black, and I felt my body go limp. For a moment, there was nothing. No pain, no fear, no sense of self. I was just a speck of dust floating aimlessly through the endless void. And then, like a flower blooming in the darkness, I felt a warmth spread through me. It was a familiar sensation, one that I had known for as long as I could remember. It was awakening. My eyes flooded open, and for a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. The room was dimly lit, and I could feel the softness of the bed beneath me. As I took in my surroundings, I remember the horror I had faced on the computer screen, the figure in the mirror, and the wraith-like man who had claimed me as his own. Shuddering, I sat up, my heart racing. The girl in the photo was gone, replaced by a simple desktop background of starscapes. I glanced around, half expecting to see the man's icy fingers reach for me from the shadows. But the room was empty. The only evidence of what happened was the lingering chill in the air and the weight that seemed to press down on my chest. My friends and I were always fascinated by the supernatural, especially werewolves. We would spend countless nights exchanging stories and theories about these mysterious creatures. Little did we know, our curiosity would lead us to a terrifying encounter with a werewolf. It was a chilling autumn evening, and my friends and I had decided to go on a camping trip in the woods. We picked a spot near a lake, surrounded by tall trees and a thick underbush. The perfect setting for a spooky night. As we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows, I couldn't feel but a sense of unease. It was as if we were being watched. My best friend, Lily, noticed my discomfort and said, "Relax, it's just your imagination playing tricks on you." But I knew it wasn't my imagination. The hairs on my arms were standing on the end, and I had a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. Ignoring my instincts, we continued chatting and enjoying our evening. As the night went on, we heard rustling in the bushes nearby. We dismissed it as an animal and continued our conversation. But the rustling grew louder, and it sounded like something was circling our campsite. "Okay, that's definitely not an animal," Lily said, her voice trembling. We all fell silent, our eyes scanning the darkness surrounding us. Suddenly, a howl echoed through the woods, making our blood run cold. It was a howl like no other, filled with rage and hunger. A howl that could only belong to a werewolf. We quickly packed our things and decided to move to a different location, further from the lake. But as we made our way through the woods, our flashlight flickered and died, leaving us in complete darkness. Panic started to set in as we stumbled through the thick underbush, trying to find our way. Just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we heard the howl again. It was closer this time. It was sent shivers down our spine. We picked up our pace, desperate to get away from whatever was out there. But it was too late. A large figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It was a werewolf, a massive, wolf-like creature that stood on its hind legs. Its fur was dark and matted, and its claws were razor sharp. We were face to face with a real-life werewolf. We were frozen in fear, unable to move as the creature let out a menacing growl. I could feel its hot breath on my face, and I could see the hunger in its eyes. It was sizzling us up, deciding which one of us to attack first. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the creature suddenly launched towards Lily. She screamed and ran in the opposite direction, and the rest of us followed suit. We ran blindly through the woods, the branches scratching in our skin and twigs snapping under our feet. Adrenaline fueled our escape as we struggled to put as much distance between us and the werewolf as possible. But it was no use. The werewolf was fast, and it quickly caught up to us. One by one, my friends were being taken down by the creature, their screams echoing through the night. I was the only one left, and I could hear the werewolf hot on my heels. I stumbled and fell face first on the forest floor, my ankle twisted onto the fall. I tried to get up and run, but the pain was excruciating. I knew I couldn't outrun the werewolf in this condition. I turned around. My heart dropped as I saw the werewolf standing over me, its fangs bared and ready to strike. I closed my eyes, preparing for the inevitable end. But nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, the werewolf was gone. I looked around confused and terrified, trying to make sense of what just happened. Then I heard a voice. "Are you okay?" I turned, and to my disbelief, I saw a man standing beside me. He had a scratch on his cheek and was covered in dirt and leaves, but there was something different about him. He had a kind look in his eyes, unlike the ferociousness of the werewolf. I think so," I stammered, still in shock. The man helped me up, and together we looked for my friends. But they were nowhere to be found, and all that was left was their torn clothes and scattered belongings. It was as if they had vanished into the air. The man explained that he was a werewolf hunter, and he had followed the creature to our campsite. He had seen it transform back into human form and offered to help me get home. I was too numb with fear to ask any questions, and I just followed him, grateful to be alive. As I arrived home, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread and anxiety. I had seen firsthand the true horror of a werewolf, and I knew I would never be the same again. From that day on, I couldn't even look at the moon without feeling a shudder of fear. My friends were never found, and their disappearance remains a mystery. But for me, it was a night I would never forget. A night where our curiosity about werewolves turned into a horrifying reality. From that day on, I knew that some things are better left as myths and legends. And as I looked up at the full moon that night, I couldn't help but wonder if the werewolf would ever come for me too. I have always been fascinated with creepy stories. The kind that gives you goosebumps and makes you question every little noise around you. And, as a writer, I'm always on the lookout for new and interesting story ideas. So, when I stumbled upon this old abandoned hospital, I knew there would be a story waiting to be told. The hospital sat at the edge of the town, hidden amongst the tall trees and overgrown bushes. Its once white walls were now covered in layers of dirt and grime. The windows were broken and the doors hanging off their hinges. The hospital had an eerie presence, as if it was trying to tell me something. I approached the entrance cautiously, my heart racing with excitement and fear. The air felt thick and heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I pushed open the creaky doors and stepped into the dimly lit lobby. The only source of light came from the small windows scattered around the room and the flickering lights above. As I ventured further into the hospital, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. I could hear the faint of sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. The hospital was filled with old medical equipment, broken furniture, and peeling wallpaper. It was like stepping back in time, and I couldn't help but wonder about the people who once roamed the halls. As the sun began to set, I decided to find a place to spend the night. The thought of spending the night in a creepy hospital excited me, and I couldn't wait to experience the eerie atmosphere in the dark. I found a room with a relatively intact bed and decided to make it my base for the night. As I settled in, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on the end, and I could hear faint whispers in the air. I brushed it off as my imagination, trying to scare myself even further. But then, I heard a door slam shut, followed by footsteps running away. I quickly grabbed my flashlight and cautiously made my way towards the source of the noise. I found myself in a long hallway, lined with doors on each side. The doors were all slightly ajar, and I could see faint glimpses of empty rooms inside. I followed the sound of the footsteps, and it led me to the end of the hallway, where a single door stood open. As I approached, I could hear faint cries coming from the inside of the room. With shaky hands, I pushed open the door, and it was met with a shocking sight. The room was filled with old hospital beds, all occupied by pale, ghostly figures. They were all dressed in old-fashioned hospital gowns, their eyes void of any life but filled with terror.
"What are you doing here?"
one of them asked, his voice shaky and filled with fear. I just came here to explore, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady.
"You must leave. This place is cursed. We are trapped here, and anyone who stays here past sundown will never leave,"
another voice chimed in. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. If it wasn't for the fear etched on their faces, I would have thought they were just a figment of my imagination. But their words struck with me. They were trapped in this hospital, and I was risking the same fate. I quickly made my way back to my room and packed my things. I didn't want to take my chances. As I was about to leave, I noticed a glint of light coming from under one of the beds. I crouched down and saw a small silver key lying on the ground. Without thinking, I grabbed it and made my way to the door. But as soon as I touched the doorknob, a sharp pain shot through my hand. The key seemed to burn my skin, and I dropped it with a cry. The door had shut on its own, leaving me trapped inside with the ghostly figures. My heart racing, I looked around for any way to escape, but the windows were too high, and the door wouldn't budge. I was trapped, just like the others. As the night went on, the ghostly figures became more restless, their cries and whispers growing louder. I could see them moving around the room, watching me with pleading eyes. I soon realized they were trying to warn me, to show me their fate, in hopes that I would not stay trapped with them forever. And as the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The ghostly figures began to move towards me, their hands reaching out as if they were trying to grab me. I could feel their cold breath on my skin, and I knew I had to act fast. Desperately, I reached out for the key and I picked it up, ignoring the burning sensation on my skin. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it, and with a loud creak, the door swung open. I didn't waste my time and ran out of the room, ignoring the cries and screams behind me. I didn't stop until I was out of the hospital and back in my car. I drove away as fast as I could, not looking back at the abandoned building. It was only when I was miles away that I realized I still had the key in my hand. I decided to return the key next day, wanted to put an end to the cursed hospital and the ghostly figures. When I arrived, the hospital was nowhere to be found. In its place was an empty field, as if the hospital had vanished into the thin air. It has been years since the incident, but the memory of the creepy hospital still haunts me. I have never been able to forget the ghostly figures and their warning. I always wonder if anyone else had stumbled upon the hospital and experienced the same fate as me. But one thing for sure, I will never go looking for a creepy story again. Some things are better left untouched and forgotten. I never thought that a seemingly harmless website like Reddit could be used as a tool for creepy stalkers. But that all changed when I became a victim of a stalker who had been using Reddit to hunt down unsuspecting victims like me. It all started innocently, though. I had been a regular user of Reddit for years, using it for various interests like sharing memes, discussing my favorite TV shows, and even getting advice on personal matters. Little did I know that my presence on the site would catch the eye of someone with more sinister intentions. It began with a private message from a user named Dark Ninja, who claimed to have seen some of my posts and found them interesting. I didn't think much of it and responded, thinking it was just another friendly interaction with a fellow Redditor. But as our conversations progressed, I started to feel uneasy. Dark Ninja seemed to have an unnerving obsession with me, constantly commenting on my posts and asking personal questions. At first, I tried to brush it off as harmless curiosity. But then, Dark Ninja started showing up in places I visited in real life. I would see him lurking around the corner of my street, or sitting at the table in my favorite coffee shop. I started to feel like I was being watched. Like I had a shadow following me everywhere I went. I began to suspect that Dark Ninja was not just a random user on Reddit, but someone who had intentionally seeking me out. I couldn't shake it off the feeling of being stalked, and it only intensified when I received a message from Dark Ninja on Reddit, confessing that he had been stalking me, that he was obsessed with me. I was terrified. How had this person found me? How long had he been watching me? And why was he doing this? These questions swirled in my mind as I debated whether to involve the authorities or handle it on my own. But before I could make a decision, Dark Ninja revealed that he had been using Reddit to stalk and find his victims. He shared his twisted methods with me, revealing that he would go through Reddit forums and profiles to pinpoint potential targets. He had been watching me for months, studying my posts and comments to learn more about me and how to approach me. I feel sick to my stomach. I had been so naive to have trusted a site like Reddit, thinking it was a safe place to share my thoughts and interests. But little did I know, it had become a hunting ground for this deranged stalker. Dark Ninja continued to send me messages, trying to convince me that he was just a fan who admired me. But I knew better now. I had to put an end to this before things escalated further. With shaking hands, I mustered the courage to report him to the authorities and cut off all communication with him. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. Dark Ninja was not one to give up easily. He started leaving disturbing comments on my post, threatening to harm me if I didn't respond to his messages. He even went as far as to post personal information about me on Reddit, sharing my name, address, and workplace, making it clear that he knew where I lived and worked. I was living in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, wondering if Dark Ninja was watching me. I felt like I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare, and there was no way out. But then, just when I thought things could get any worse, I received a message from a user named Reddit Savior. They claimed to have seen my post about being stalked by Dark Ninja and offered to help me. It was a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had consumed me. Reddit Savior explained that they were a part of a group on Reddit that actively searched and reported any suspicious or dangerous users. They had noticed Dark Ninja's actions and had been monitoring him for some time. They even had evidence of his previous stalking incidents and were determined to put an end to it. I was hesitant to trust another stranger from Reddit, but I had no other choice. I gave Reddit Savior all the information I had on Dark Ninja and prayed that they would be able to stop him. Days went by, and Dark Ninja seemed to have disappeared from Reddit and my life. I was cautiously hopeful that he had been caught or scared off by Reddit Savior. But then, a few weeks later, I received a message from Reddit Savior with news that made my blood run cold. They had discovered that Dark Ninja was a notorious stalker who had been using various social media platforms, including Reddit, to find and target his victims. And he wasn't alone. There was a group of stalkers working together on Reddit, using the anonymity and reach of the website to their advantage. My heart sank as I realized that I was not the only victim. This group of stalkers had been using Reddit to prey on innocent people, and I had unknowingly become a part of their twisted game. Thanks to Reddit Savior and the other members of the group, the authorities were able to track down and arrest the stalkers. It was a relief to know that they were finally off the streets, but the damage had already been done. The trauma and fear that had inflicted on the victims would stay with us forever. It made me realize that we can never be too careful with our online presence, and that there are dangerous individuals lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims.